I don't know if I would use the word flunked. Next question. Anybody else? Phil.
What's the impact of life insurance? I know that a lot of folks buy second-to-die policies, and that effectively makes the estate tax more of a tax on income as opposed to on a stock of wealth at death, because they pay on an annual basis the premiums. How does that affect the economic analysis, and what's your experience been with insurance? Did any of your families buy it? How has that cost affected your businesses?
I think the one thing that you have to understand, obviously insurance is a safeguard, but there's two ways that an entrepreneur looks at the insurance policies, especially with someone who's 82 years old, which is a little bit of an issue. But the first is that money can be spent better elsewhere, and typically that's the first and only issue. And so when I mentioned that we're going to go out and we looked at, talk to lawyers and we talked to all of these, there are all sorts of plans out there, but all of those plans cost a lot of capital up front to put in place to then secure the capital later down the track. And when you're running a business, if you take a look at my business now, at any one time I've got millions of dollars of inventory and fuel, and if the fuel markets go upside down, in a couple of days I can be wiped out. And so to have reserve cash is worth more to get this business over the hump of commercialization than to do to do the planning that would otherwise have to be required. So yeah, it makes sense, and everybody says, well, why don't you just do this and why don't you just do that? You've got to protect your business first, and that's the issue.
I can speak on that as well. I know when my grandmother passed away in 1997, my dad kind of, vaguely looked into, how could he structure it so that my brother and I didn't have to pay, go through the same thing that he did. But unfortunately for him, he was an alcoholic and a heavy smoker, so he couldn't get life insurance. So, it's not always the golden goose, I
could add one more thing to that.
Please.
In my case, we have got a policy and a trust that will cover some of it. We couldn't pony up the amount of cash we needed to do all of it, but I can give you an idea what it would take for what it took a friend of mine in his cash. They had this is a well-established family winery in Napa Valley, and they just put up front $1.5 million to buy a policy because they knew that the dad probably had maybe had 5 years, maybe had 10 years. He was 80, so $1.5 million went out of that winery operation, and we all know what that could have been better spent with.
Any other questions?
Dick, can I just make a comment real quick? It's really interesting. I just stepped out for a minute, and Frank Keating was having lunch out here, which is rather ironic. Dick, can you explain the role that the life insurance as an industry plays, and how it's sort of ironic that Frank Keating would be having lunch at Charlie Palmer's today?
Very curious indeed. For those of you who don't know, Frank Keating is the head of the life insurance lobby here in Washington, D.C., the very lobby that spends, well, last year they spent $18 million lobbying, and their number one issue for the entire year was keep the death tax in place. Now, fortunately, today is day number 229 of no death taxes. We won that short-term battle, but as we continue to fight this battle, it is curious that the life insurance industry, who makes almost as much money in premiums on second-to-die policies as the government itself makes bringing in death taxes, and that he is dining right outside of these doors is intriguing.
Like the torches.
Anybody got a pitchfork? Any other interesting questions?
Dick, why don't you invite him to speak?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have any of you actually had to let people go as a result of the tax? Like, trying to pay the tax?
Okay. Have any of you let people go, decreased your number of employment due to any phase of the death tax's influence on your operations?
I'm unemployed because of that.
Oh, that's personal.
In our family's case, you know, my grandfather did some pre-planning when he knew he had terminal cancer. He had about a year to live. And he just ceased operations, and his foreman voluntarily retired to, you know, out of the farming operation and went somewhere else and was a college janitor, you know. But, you know, he left the job he liked. There were 2 other guys that were no longer hired on a temporary basis.
Anybody else? Any additional questions? Steve Enton.
Since you raised one of my pet peeves on the insurance question, I thought I'd make the notation that if I were an insurer trying to insure you 3 gentlemen as a group, I would have to charge you collectively what I expected to have to pay you in the future to cover the tax. So, in a very real sense, buying insurance is still paying the tax, just through a different mechanism. You really don't save anything, except for the security in knowing that if one person dies earlier than another, you don't face that added a burden sooner than you can prepare for it. And then, of course, you do have to pay the premiums to the people who are trying to keep their business going by stepping on your necks even harder. So it's not a way around the tax at all. And if Congress thinks that somehow you're ducking the tax or making yourselves, enabling yourselves to escape it free and clear by buying insurance, they're out of their minds.
So you're saying that we have 2 choices. We can pay the life insurance companies now, or we can pay the government later. Any additional questions? Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this added some facets to your thinking on the issue of the death tax. I hope it added some dimensions of when you think of the subject, you can see it in a new light. And if you go home doing that, then this luncheon and this exercise and what we had to share with you was a success. Again, please consider the American Family Business Foundation as a source, as your source for issues regarding family businesses and also estate taxes. Have a good afternoon.